Good morning, everybody. I'm hoping you're having fun. So my presentation is called "Oops: Tales of a Game Dev Studio and Anatomy of a Failure." And what this presentation is about, it's about Spellcaster Studios, which is a company, one of the first game dev studios in Portugal that ran from 2004 to 2010. As you can see, since it ended up in 2010, and most of you or nobody of you heard about it before, it was a failure. It didn't work out. So why am I talking about a company that didn't go anywhere? Well, because we don't talk enough about failure. We all heard the stories about how Notch became a billionaire with Minecraft, and how Jonathan Blow became a huge star in the indie scene with Braid. But we seldom hear stories about how things failed. And there are many lessons to be taken from there. Um, to be honest, I wish I had a time machine to go back and just slap some sense into me back then. So, who am I, and why am I talking about this? Well, knowing me provides context to the lessons of Spellcaster Studios. From age 10, I wanted to be a game developer. It was before that, I wanted to be a writer. Then I saw a computer for the first time, and I thought, okay, this is what I want to do the rest of my life. I started with the ZX Spectrum, which some of you might know. Uh, Wrote basic text-based games. Of course, those aren't screenshots from my own games. I couldn't find anything from my archives. It was so long ago. So I used Basic and Assembler to write simple games. I did my first commercial game back when I was 11 or 12. Basically commercial because I convinced all my friends to buy it from me. It was just a shooting space game. Then I moved on to the Amiga, best machine ever made. Got very, very interested in the demo scene in which people would show off their technical prowess, trying to one up everybody else. Started making more ambitious games using Amiga Basic, Amos, C, and Assembler. Then I moved on to PC development in '93. This is all pre-internet, so all the information I had on how to do things were by buying books, talking with friends, a lot of letters written to people that I thought were amazing when I got my hands on their work. Then I went to college and got access to the internet, and a whole new world opened. Still more interest in the demo scene, which was just blowing up, using stuff like Turbo Pascal, Assembler, C++, and Flash to write games and demos. And then I started, when I finished college, I started some commercial work, mostly outsourcing stuff, corporate software, corporate games for promotional purposes, things like that. These are screenshots from some of the stuff I've done. So basically, I was something that thought himself as being really smart because I was doing all these things that nobody else was doing back here in Portugal. And this takes me to my first lesson. Lesson one, you're not as smart as you think you are. There are a lot of smart people all over the world. Just because you're in a bubble and you think you're very unique doesn't mean you are. You might be, but you probably aren't. I found out also that putting in the work is much more important than being smart. And I also learned that other people are not wrong automatically. That's something that happens when you think you're very, very smart. You get this idea that when people say something that you don't agree with, you automatically think they're wrong. And they, most of the time, or a lot of the times, they are not. So challenge your perceptions on this. I wish I had understood that when I started making my own company. So after a bit, in 2000 and mid 2004, I joined forces with two other people. Carlos Oliveira, which was the business side, and he was a bit slightly older than me, so he had a bit more life experience. I was at the time 25 or something, 26, so very young to be thinking on business and stuff like that. I was just wanted to have fun making games. And Diogo, which was the art part of the company. And together we started working on our first game on the recently formed Spellcaster Studios. This game was called Warblade. It was inspired by the old classic Wings of Fury, which was a side-scrolling strafing game in which you would dogfight other airplanes and just try to strike things on the ground. It was a lot of fun. I loved that game. So I decided to do my own take on it, but spaceship inspired. And this leads me to the second lesson, which is prototype. Do prototypes a lot of the time, because a lot of ideas on paper might not be good in practice. This was one of these cases. We built the prototype for Warblade, and although Wings of Fury was a lot of fun, the new ideas we had for the space version of Wings of Fury weren't that good. It wasn't fun because you lost all that feeling of scale and speed, which is important in a space game. So prototyping is very good to get ideas out of the way. Don't love your ideas too much. This is also something that's very important. You have to be ready to give them the axe. Even if you love the concept or some idea, it might only be fun for you. So do the prototype, test with people. Just take it for a test spin and see if beauty is in the eye of the beholder. If you're the only person that thinks the idea is fun, it's probably not a very good commercial idea. If you don't want to give them the axe because you feel that there is something about the idea that's really appealing, even if your prototype is not clicking, just rethink them. Just store them in a bin and take a look at them later after you had more time distance to really rethink the whole design principles, design tenets. So we started working on this Wings of Fury, and one of the first things we did was build our own engine. This was back in 2004, so good commercial, good engines weren't something that was around. Today it's Unreal and Unity, but back then Unreal costed, I think, $500,000, and Unity didn't exist, and even most of the other commercial engines that were available, either for free or for a small fee, were 2D based. So we didn't really have a chance but building our own custom technology, which we called Spellbook. Throughout the 6 years that the company lasted, we kept on improving this engine and taking ideas from the other engines. So we had an editor, we had light mapping, terrain editing, real-time ambient occlusion, light mapping tools. So we had to build all these tools. And this takes me to lesson 3. You'll have to choose if we're talking about small companies, which is the case at this time. We were only 3, and even when we were at the largest, we were only 12. You will have to decide if you want to make engines or games. I love making engines, but time is limited. The amount of time it takes to get a production-ready engine is huge. It's not just making it work on your computer, it's making it work on all computers, on consoles, on with all the tooling that you need. Otherwise, you'll have to train people to use it. It's very time consuming, very expensive, and I would say 95% of the times it's not justified. There is nothing so unique about your project that you can't make on an existing piece of technology. Focus on the what, not the how. Focus on making the game, not how the game is made. It's very interesting saying to people, oh, we built our own engine and it might make for a good story. But what happens is that people don't really care about that. So we had our own engine, we started working, and we ended up rewriting all the concept. It was no longer Wings of Fury clone. It was a full 3D arcade shooter game, in a similar line as the old Freelancer games, although it played a bit like Descent. So we released it in February 2015. And this, we come to the fourth lesson. Be careful with names. As you can see from the title of this presentation, I'm not very good with names, but we thought we had a jackpot with Warblade. Warblade was a good name, strong name, but it was taken. And it was taken for 2 or 3 years. It wasn't like, oh, somebody just released a game with that name. No, it was already taken. So we had to come up with the title on the fly. So I came up with Shadow Stars, the Ventry Belt, which is where the game takes place. So absolutely terrible name. So before it comes to this and you have to just scramble to get a name without real thought behind it, do searches with the names. Don't use the working title thing. I've seen a lot of games throughout the years that use a working title situation. No, this is just a working title, just a working title. And at a certain point, the working title becomes the name. And it's hard to change it in the long run. So really think about it. It's one part of the creative experience. So we got some acclaim with the game. We won some awards in the proto-internet. There weren't that many huge sites, some blogs, especially for a niche game like ours. So we got some awards for storytelling, and we got the award also for how difficult the game was. That's kind of a constant on my games. And we got some sales, and we were very happy with it. We just released it, and it was working as we intended, but we were tired of it. So by the end of the development process, we kind of just felt that we wanted to release, just throw it out there and move on to the next idea, whatever it was. So we kind of abandoned it. And lesson 5, don't abandon your games after release. This is a terrible idea. My excuse was that I was very young. I thought, okay, we did this in some months. It was successful, so the next game will be huge. So I would just want to jump into the next game. Support your games after launch, market them. They won't survive otherwise, especially today where thousands of games are released every year. So you really need to invest the time. Don't think that the development process is something that takes, I don't know, 6 months, 1 year, 1 year and a half, and you're done. You will have to keep on working on it, bug fixing, improving it, generating community, that sort of things for months after the release. So you have to consider that in your budget, in your schedule. Think about patches, sequels, DLC, anything that can help monetize and keep the interest on your game alive. Listen to your audience. They will most of the times tell you exactly what they want and what they're, more importantly, willing to pay for. Find partners that can help you with this. Again, I thought I was very smart back in 2004 or 5. So I thought I could handle the marketing by myself, that I could just get the word out. And it's not true. Market is better done by marketing experts, not software engineers with delusions of grandeur. Today, games are all about player retention. Being able to stand out in the middle of a saturated market is extremely hard. So the best tool you have is your players. Your players will be the ones that will kind of convince their friends to give it a go, will tell their favorite streamers to play your game, all that sort of things. So building a community and keeping the community there. So after we released Shadow Stars the Venturi Belt and abandoning it, we went back to the drawing board and started working on our next game. So we, at this time, we thought we were seeing a lot of movement on the casual game market. So we thought, okay, casuals are a thing. Let's go. Let's do a casual game. And Something Fishy was born. It is a 2D casual game. But again, another lesson. Don't shift the type of game all the time. So we were coming out from developing a 3D game, space shooter game. We had the technology, the engine that could support that kind of game. And then we suddenly shifted to a 2D game. We had to build a whole set of new tools to support this. Our old knowledge about the problems with 3D became kind of useless, not completely useless, but we couldn't really leverage all the lessons that we've learned making the previous game. We have to learn how to do everything again. What are the nuances of 2D games versus 3D games? This was a big shift, but even going from a 3D game to a 3D game, but changing the genre, like going from a space shooter game to a first-person shooter, would be hard. So avoid shifting the type of game you do all the time. It sounds like fun, having new challenges to work on and all that, but in the long run, it kind of hurts your productivity and the capability of making more and better games. So we had about a 4-month development cycle for Something Fishy. So it was kind of a smooth game to create, was fun, had a tight gameplay loop. So it was quite an interesting game. And we talked to publishers this time. So we learned the lesson with Shadow Stars, decided not to go for self-publishing it, but talk to publishers, especially the big ones that were already occupying and had the distribution channels for casual games. But nobody wanted it. A lot of reasons for why nobody wanted it, but here comes lesson 7. Don't chase trends. Although it's fine, it can be fine, but usually what happens is that you're already starting too late. So when you finally finish, in this case, a casual game, but we saw the same happening with Battle Royale genre and things like that. When you finally get to market, or you're in the condition to go to market, the trend has gone. It's already a saturated market. Note that this is different from predicting trends, okay? In one case, you're aiming at where the target was. The other one, you're just trying to lead your shot. So I think casual games will be great. That's a good way to make a decision on your game. Trying to see, oh, what are the huge games now, and let's do one like that one, is not predicting a trend, and it usually ends up in tears. So at this time, we basically were, the first game was successful but abandoned. The second game didn't go off the ground, never released, because we couldn't find an adequate publisher, and we knew our marketing skills weren't good enough to try self-publishing again. We were working part-time with the company because we still needed to feed ourselves, and games weren't that profitable back then. So we had the opportunity to join something called Game Invest. Game Invest was an organization created in 2006 that wanted to be the seed of the game industry in Portugal. So it was born out of the National Association of Game Developers and Animators for some weird reason. The people that were in charge of this found some seed capital to invest. There was some strings attached with that investment, namely it was located in Porto Alegre, which is a very small town in the interior of Portugal. Doesn't have much of a tech industry or anything like that, but it was thought that this could make it grow. So there was some investment, local investment. So we wanted to go full time, and we proposed 2 games to Game Invest. One of them was Ant Swarm. It was basically a kind of an idle, what we would call today an idle game, in which some ants would come up from their ant hills, would forage for food, leaving pheromone trails. So it was kind of a simulation game, and you could affect the behavior of some of ants by leaving pheromone trails that some would follow, and they would leave pheromone trails to others. So it was kind of a very organic kind of game that was built on a game jam, and we thought it was fun. It had some fun ideas. And more importantly, Blitz and Massive. At this time, Blitz and Massive was an isometric puzzle game in which we controlled 2 robots, Blitz and Massive, that had different skill sets, and they would have to go into a facility of an ancient alien civilization, find the mysteries inside, and stop a kind of a doomsday clock within. So we proposed these 2 games, got accepted by Game Invest. So some funding, and we got an office space to work in. And because of this, we changed cities. So I went from nearby Lisboa to Porto Alegre, about 250 kilometers away. One of the things that happened just when we got there was that Game Invest wanted the first title coming out from their brand to be more impressive than an isometric puzzle game. So they asked us if we could build something that was bigger while keeping the idea of the characters, because they liked the idea of having 2 characters and the opportunities for marketing that having a very strongly character-focused game. But they wanted something that they really could impress people with. So we kind of rescoped Blitz and Massive. And Blitz and Massive went from being just an isometric puzzle game, very mechanics-based, to a story-based, not point and click, but a graphical adventure. It wasn't point and click because it was designed with consoles in mind, but the basic ideas were there. So we come here to lesson 8. Don't change your game if you're not comfortable. I was scared of just building such a big game. So converting something that I could build with my friends, with 3 people, to go into something that I knew I needed to hire a lot of people to do. So I was a bit scared with it. I wasn't really comfortable with the idea, but the opportunity of making games full time kind of overrid my general preservation sense. A problem with this is that changing your game if you're not comfortable with it compromises your vision on the game. So it becomes much less focused. And although we managed on Blitz and Massive to refocus the game after 2 months, so for the first 2 months of development, we really didn't know what the game was actually about. After 2 months, we kind of managed to get that under control, but it could have gone way worse in that regard because we compromised our vision. So we kind of hired 8 people in 1 month. And if you've ever done any sort of hiring, you know how dangerous this is. Blowing up a company from 3 people to 11 in 1 month is not something you should do. And here we come to lesson 9. Beware of hiring. In our case, it went fine. 1 out of the 8 that we hired were, that was wrong. It was 7 out of 8 were awesome. So we only had 1 case of something that didn't work that well. But other than that, it went fine. But we had too many cooks because we didn't manage the hired people's expectation. Everybody thought we are going to work in games, so we will all steer the ship in terms of creativity. And that kind of not true. We already had a game design. We already had some idea on how the game should go. But everybody wanted to build their own game. And it took us a long time to get everybody into the same page. People take time to get up to speed. So the ramp up time can be huge, especially if you're working with custom technology. In our case, we didn't have Unity or Unreal. So people who never saw our engine had to learn all of it from a programming and from a content perspective. And all of that took a lot of time, about one to 2 months of training in which people almost didn't do any content work whatsoever. Even in my case, I never managed a team. So suddenly being in charge of 7 or 8 people was very difficult to handle. You kind of need the experience that comes with age to be able to manage a smallish team. So I can't even imagine how hard it must be to manage a huge team. So we had about a 10-month development cycle. And if you've ever done game development, you know that 10 months to build a graphical adventure with 5 chapters, over 5,000 lines of dialogue, puzzles, and all that in custom technology is very short amount of time. So lesson 10, avoid crunch. We didn't, and it kind of burned us all. It burns health, it burns relations. We had a lot of people that had problems at home because of not paying attention to their loved ones. We had people with big health issues because we were working 12, 14, 16 hours a day because we were all working from a place of passion. But it's really not worth it. It's diminishing returns. Every hour you put in additionally just leads to you can get half done. It would be equivalent to half an hour if you were rested. And if you take it this longer and longer, it's even less. So really avoid crunch. It's even from business, corporate perspective, it's not a very good proposition. So, and this magnum opus, this great work of art, a game that I'm really proud of, even today, was never released. And this takes us to lesson 11. And I won't enter the details on why the game wasn't released, or not a lot of details, because Get Legal Aid should tell you enough. Nobody likes lawyers, but they save a lot of pain. One thing that's very common, and I see this a lot in young companies, don't get legal counsel only after the damage is done, when you have a problem. If you already have a problem, the lawyer can sometimes work it out. Sometimes it can manage it, but the best course of action is getting legal counsel before you do anything, because they can steer you to the right direction and avoid you legal issues. It's cheaper. A lot of people say, okay, but hiring a lawyer is expensive. It's cheaper in the long run. Find someone to advise you on contracts, on even on business decisions. They might be useful because they can really open your eyes to the possibility of wrongdoing and all that. Blitz and Massive ran into some issues with the finances, the financial parts of it, and at Game Invest. But the game was already almost done. But because we didn't get legal counsel, the rights were a mess. Nobody knew exactly who had the rights to what and how could we release the game if they defaulted on their obligation. So it was just a mess all around, and it wasn't worth the headaches. So we basically spent almost 1 year working on a game. It was, to be honest, it's one of the things I'm most proud of in my professional life. It's a fun game. It still exists, but we couldn't release it. So it's kind of frustrating. Because of those issues, we left Game Invest, and we found ourselves with almost no money. And we had to do something. We worked on a lot of game ideas, casual puzzle games, more children-friendly person action-driven hamster samurai game. A game with that we controlled again with the pheromones. We controlled the environment using pheromones. An RPG, promotional games for brands. So we worked on a lot of game ideas in the following couple of years. This takes us to lesson 12, focus. Your next idea is always cooler than the current one. What happened most of the times is that we didn't even went with the prototypes to market to get somebody to finance it. We would just get a new idea, and that was what we thought was the great idea. Because the next idea always sounds cooler than the one you're currently working on. I think this is a psychological factor. The novelty is always seems better. But what happens when you're trying to build a game studio is that you just jump around all the time and you don't invest the time necessary to turn what might be a good idea into a great one, and a great one into something that can be financed and actually published. So resist the temptation of switching ideas all the time. Even when we actually went to publishers and revenue source and financial sources, nobody really cared. There were a lot of reasons for this. One of them was that we didn't have a portfolio. We had an impressive tech and art portfolio. We had our own custom engine that was really good by the time standards. We had a good art portfolio, but we lacked completed games. So people kind of looked at us as somebody that couldn't finish games. And since we still had some difficulty explaining what went wrong with the previous game, it didn't help matters. The lack of focus was evident in the types of games. We didn't even do prototypes along the same way. We did third-person games, action games, RPGs, strategy, puzzle. So we didn't even have a focus that made potential publishers believe in our capability of going from start to an end stage. Another issue, but I didn't include it as a lesson because that was more of bad luck situation. We were at the time where consoles were going full swing and interest on the PC market was almost gone, before being revived back in 2010, 11. So what happened is everybody, all the publishers were interested in console games. But to make console games, you had to have dev kits. To have dev kits, you had to buy or to get access to a dev kit. And it wasn't easy back in the days. Either you had connections or you had a publisher that could provide you with the dev kits. So we kind of had this condition with this catch-22. We couldn't prove we could do console games because we couldn't get the opportunity to do console games. So that kind of also worked a lot against us. To make ends meet during these times, we worked a lot on the telco side of business. We had a product that was considered very good for the telecommunications and industries, particularly in the digital television market. We also did a lot of work with virtual cities using actual map data to build cities. This was time before Google Earth and that sort of thing. So basically, we would go to the municipalities, and if they agreed, they would provide us their data sources, and we would build the virtual models as accurate as we could from that data source. Lesson 14, have a plan B. Okay, if a deal fails, what do? We didn't have a plan B when Blitz and Massive wasn't released, and that kind of led us into a situation in which we couldn't. We had to accept everything. So we were scrambling between building a new prototype to show off and getting some revenue source. We were scrambling in survival mode all of the time. So if we had prepared for that before, we probably could have made this a lot less painful. So have a plan B for everything, or a plan C or a D. The more plans, the better. If a deal fails, if something doesn't come through, if you encounter an unexpected turn of events, what do? Find, for small studios, I would recommend to find alternate source of income, like porting or outsourcing. These can be good, although I understand that most game developers out there don't want to do porting or outsourcing. But it can be a very good way to train your team, to get contacts in the industry, and to just guarantee an income source. So then we come to the final chapter of our journey, which is the downfall. Work external to games was 100% of the time, or almost 100% of the time. So we couldn't keep on working on games because we had to do the virtual cities and the telco work and some work for museums and stuff like that, that kind of managed us to survive day to day. But we couldn't actually go back into making games, which was what every single one of us wanted. It's very this kind of sounds harsh, but it's very expensive having employees. And here comes lesson 15. Be very careful with money. Do your math before you hire. Try to be as accurate with your budget as possible. Don't pad the numbers, because the publisher will find them more interesting and that sort of thing. It just will make you go into a spiral in which you don't, it's very hard to get out. Don't hire anybody if you just need temporary work. I believe people, I like having people on board, making people feel a part of the team. But there are a lot of positions in a small game development company, which doesn't make sense to have a person in full time. Like, for example, concept artist. Again, this is the example for a very small team, not huge ones. Cash flow can be hard to manage. A lot of the work we did got paid in 3 to 6 to 1 year. To 3 to 6 months and that sort of thing. So we didn't have the money, although we were owed a lot of money that we could use to pay employees and state finances and things like that. We didn't have the money at hand. We didn't have the cash flow for it. So we basically just accumulated debt so we could pay what we needed to pay our employees and stuff. So we could get the mass injections of capital from every 6 months or something that we used to pay the debt, but we were already on the red because of the interest and that sort of thing. So cash flow handling is very hard, especially in game development, because in game development studios, you only get money about once you release the game and for the 6 months or 9 months after that. Then it's a trickle, not an actual big sum. So you have to prepare for those days, because getting into debts and all that makes it very hard to stabilize the cash flow in your company. And always remember, this is very harsh, but the good of the many outweigh the good of the few. We could have fired some people to lessen the overhead of the company so we could last longer. But to be honest, I wasn't mature enough or old enough to be able to do that decision. So we ended up closing early, and everybody lost their jobs instead of just a few. So, yeah. So we had a lot of financial strain, especially on the founders and all that, which led to decreased quality of work, which in turn led to Spellcaster Studios closing in May 2010. So was this the end? Well, some of the people at Spellcaster Studios got jobs in the game dev, about half of them, mostly abroad, because at the time there still wasn't any game development industry in Portugal, or it was extremely small, so jobs weren't there. So a lot of people, about half of the people, went outside of Portugal and got jobs in the game industry. Others chose other paths, less stressful, with less crunch involved. Thankfully, everybody landed on their feet, and I keep in touch with most of them, so this doesn't end on a very extremely negative note. It was quite a journey, all of this. I would have liked to avoid some of the mistakes I did, and that's why I'm sharing this story with you today. So some might can see some warning lights coming off in their brain if they see that they're making some of the same mistakes I did. As for me, I abandoned game development for about 5 years after this. I was just really burned out. Returned to game development in 2005 and released a couple of games with Fun Punch Games, Striker's Edge, dodgeball with real weapons sort of game, and a mobile surf game called Billabong Surf Trip 2. And I worked on my own stuff and still am working on my own stuff. And I'm currently a teacher at Lusófono University because late in life, I found that I have a real interest in teaching and sharing my life experience, technically, in terms of game design and in terms of how to fail a company. So this is my story, and I thank you all for listening. And I'm available for questions if you have some. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. I would like you to ask to stop sharing. Okay, fantastic. And several of our students have prepared questions for you. So first question will put Barbara Kubishova, student of the first class of game design. Barbara?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was all like very valuable for me. But all of the lessons were like from professional field. So I would like to know, how did that change you in your personal life, like this experience?
Well,
did you become more patient, or?
To be honest, I would love to say that it enabled me to grow a lot. Well, it eventually did, but for a couple of years, I was very angry about the whole situation, which I felt was really unfair, and the world was against me, that sort of thing. But actually, as I grew a bit older and I kind of did this sort of post-mortem of my company and I looked back, I just retained the good stuff, and I became a lot more calm a lot. I would say that today I would be a much better leader because I would have the ability to see different perspectives, which I couldn't when I was really into it, very deep into it. And I was very young, and I was, as I said, I thought I was very smart. I was wrong. So basically, I think it kind of improved the value I attribute to people more than I love making games. I loved having a company and all that, but the relationships with the people that share that time with me, those will be with me forever. And I keep in touch with almost all of them on a regular basis. So it's all about the people, and that's why I'm so anti-crunch these days and that sort of thing, because that kind of destroys people. And this is about making games, but it's about establishing connections. And even making games, it's about establishing connections with your audience, with not only your fellow developers, but also with your audience and all that. So the relationship part is the part that's most important, not the lines of code you do or that 3D model.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Next question I will put Marian Ferko, who is the president of Association of Slovak Developers. So the question of Marian Ferko.
So thank you for your presentation. You have a really good experience, really hard experience. And my question is very simple. So if you had the opportunity to start your career again, what would you change?
To be honest, I think about that a lot of times. But one of the main things, and I say this to my students all the time, is get experience in the game industry before you're doing your own thing. I understand this need. People that create games are usually creative people. They want to do their own thing. They want to have their own messages. But I think that everybody has something to gain in going 1 year, 2 years working either in AAA, other indie studios, even in slot machine games, that sort of thing. Just get a feel on how the real world, the real industry works. We as teachers, we can spend hours explaining how things work and how they should work. But at the end, you have to feel them for yourself. So I would say that the advice I would give to my former self is go outside for a couple of years, learn the ropes with big guys, with the big studios, even if you're doing games that aren't your game, other people's games, but learn with it and then bring that knowledge back to your home base and just try to spread that knowledge around and make people grow with you. So that I would think that would be one of the main things I would say. That and be much more careful with loans and interest rates and all that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you for your answers and for your presentation. So
I would just like to say one more thing. I would like to thank the organization for this invitation to speak here. Thank you very much on my behalf and all of the people at Spellcaster Studios that I told about this presentation. So thank you very much.
Okay, welcome.